Okay, I can definitely agree with that. What if you take something like a 2D side scroller? Like for example, somebody mentioned to me it would be awesome if somebody took like Commander Keen and turned it into like a 3D platformer like Spyro, and take like all the level design and everything exactly the way that it was for like the old Commander Keen games, but like gave it a third dimension. And what would that be like to have, you know, that third dimension of depth and other things going on that you would not have seen in the 2D version? Is that something that's a valid form of a new game?
Well, at that point, isn't that comparable to the difference between the Super Mario Bros. From 1 to 3 and Super Mario World?
Yep, absolutely.
If I could just jump in there,
Yeah.
I think an example that I thought of immediately that didn't quite work was like Earthworm Jim 1 and 2, and then Earthworm Jim 3D, and like apparently it didn't work at all. I never properly played it, but I mean sometimes when you make that leap, all the mechanics don't actually leap with it. It doesn't necessarily make it a better game.
Does anybody enjoy the 3D reboots of Mario?
Yeah.
Yeah?
That's when I stopped.
That's when you stopped? So you stopped playing Mario when it became 3D?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Because you're giving me something that's, you know, telling me to jump past a cliff, you know? You're taking a 3D scene, projecting it onto a 2D screen. I can't tell how far it is. I was like, screw it, not this.
Did you ever play Mario 3D Land on the 3DS with the stereoscopic 3D?
Nah, I stopped.
Oh yeah.
So much 3D.
Because that was addressing the exact issue.
Yeah, I heard it got better, which
Yeah.
is the bad part of me stopping. But yeah, I really enjoyed the first up to Super Nintendo. As soon as I started getting to N64 and all that stuff, then
It's a totally different game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
You
starting,
could say there's some similarities, but it's really...
yeah. I'm starting to avoid like the side-scrolling 3D Mario because honestly it's the same thing over and over and over and over again. I'm sick of it personally. Like, I'm honestly waiting for Super Mario Galaxy 3 right now because I've played all the side-scrolling Marios and I've had fun with them when I was a child, and like the 3D World one, like they haven't done that many, right? They have the 64 and then they've got the Galaxy series, and I really think that they have more potential at this point than the side-scrolling Mario games. That's just
It is a
personal
different
opinion.
game. I mean, one of the big parts of the 3D is that it's about exploring and discovering and understanding the world and revisiting the world. So you have this, you know, this environment that you come at from a different perspective. And all the 2D ones, they're not about that game. They're about the game of this is the level you play it, this is the level you play it. So it's two totally different games. But in terms of the art and the visual side, like adding the third dimension enables developers to be able to revisit a world from different perspectives because of that third dimension.
Yeah.
While with a two-dimensional game, it's a lot harder to revisit a two-dimensional level the way you would a three-dimensional level.
Yeah.
So it's something interesting from the visual side. I guess that might even be a point where visuals now are impacting gameplay, because it's the visual presentation in 3D that now allows you to have a different gameplay.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting.
You made a point. This is good.
I can jump in there again.
Oh.
I could have jumped in a lot, but NES
You know how to jump in.
Remix, they actually purposely change how the classic games work. So I think in the second one, you actually go to the left in Mario Brothers instead of to the right.
Yeah.
So they do different things like that. So it sort of changes the game a little bit, but I heard the first one didn't get the greatest reviews. So it sort of shifts your expectations.
Yeah, Wario Land, so all the Wario games, I think were the first, well, one of the big key ones in my mind were 2D, yeah, okay, we now have a different way of visiting it, and you play a level one way, and then you play a level the other way, and there's actually like, you know, two perspectives to the 2D world. 3D, I think there's more than just two perspectives, there's a lot more than that, which is interesting, but...
Yeah, the 2D versus 3D thing, to me, there's a similar point in there to the sort of a hyper-realism versus different art styles, in that it should really be about the game and the gameplay. That's usually number one for me. Like I alluded to earlier, when I hit the first 3D version of Mario, to me, it was almost like oh yeah, 3Ds, it's new. Let's kind of try it out. And the gameplay was just terrible. And sometimes the hyperrealism thing, that's where it comes in. It's like, yeah, it looks awesome, but what am I doing? So it's really, really good when these things add value. But if because of all these new features, gameplay, if it's the same, maybe not so bad. But if gameplay starts to suck really bad, and there's all these awesome things happening, then it's no longer a game. Right?
Yeah, you're just watching a bunch of effects happen on the screen.
Yeah, like you don't want to watch because they suck.
Exactly.
I'm gonna throw another indie darling game out there, Fez. If anybody's ever played Fez, that idea of having 3D, but it's not really 3D, but it's kind of 3D. It gives you that idea that there's more. Like I don't know about if anybody else has played this game, but when I played it, I still haven't finished it, but like I always felt lost. Like always, it was so disorienting, but also really interesting in that sort of. I could go to all four sides of things and be like, okay, so I've seen 4 sides of this area, and then I always felt like whenever I moved to a new area, I was missing something. Like I just always had this feeling that I was missing something, which is interesting, but also like it was a bit of a discouragement for me as well, because I don't know, when I play a game, I want to like finish everything. I want to I'm one of those like people that needs to look under every rock and like open open everything. And
I find that game also may present itself as a platformer, but its core mechanics are a puzzle game. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's an interesting hybrid between like. Everybody is really comfortable with the idea of playing a platformer, but like, let's make it a puzzle game, because a lot of people are like, well, I don't like puzzle games. Puzzle games are boring. But I can relate to a platformer as a game player. So maybe I'll give this a try, kind of thing. It's like a sneaky little trick. Speaking of puzzle games, has anybody ever played Professor Layton? This is the one that came up to me as an art game. It was a DS game. It was apparently like a really fantastic art puzzle game. It was kind of a choose your own adventure, move around.
Is that the cartoon one where it plays a cartoon?
Yeah, and you have
played it. I've seen a lot of trailers.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of really good things, but I don't have a DS, so I've never played it. And I have one other one written down, another game that I haven't played but looks to me really interesting. It's called The Dream Machine.
It's really nice. Oh, beautiful game, beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, again, I've seen lots of different videos for it. I haven't played it. It's a puzzle game. It's kind of like one of those you have to tap everywhere and choose your.
It's a point-and-click adventure game.
Yeah, it's a point-and-click. But the whole thing is made in claymation. And everything has been animated in claymation, and it's that same sort of like, it reminds me of Tearaway, right, where it's that sort of tactile thing of like how you were used to playing as a kid, and like that experimentation of having these like malleable
and
things.
It really puts, like, you can see fingerprints on the clay. It's not like perfect claymation, it's like rough, oh, I could have made that myself clay. I see the guy's fingerprint. Literally, right there. So that's really interesting. So then is the question, well, I want to make a puzzle, or I want to make a point-and-click game, but I don't want it to look like everything else. What do I do? Or I want to make a claymation game. How can I make a claymation game that's actually able to work? What platform can I put that in to make a claymation actually work as a game? Because it would be really difficult to do, say, a platformer or something like that in claymation, whereas maybe having a point-and-click game is a little bit more feasible. That's a question. Like at the Game Jam a couple of years ago, Breakfall did a claymation platformer, so.
Yeah?
It was okay.
Was it really difficult?
No, I mean, like, they pulled it off in the 48 hours, and it won that year's thing, and it was phenomenal. What was it called? Anyway, you were a king. And you were sneaking in on the queen and trying to get back into the house before she found out. It was ridiculous. It was a great game. Hilarious. But anyway, no, they managed to pull off clay, and it's just all about you take your pictures and they're your sprites. But Loom also did, I don't know if anybody knows Loom, and there's another game coming out, but it's a game where they take...
it's all stop motion, right?
Yeah, it's stop motion, and they even do like... So it's a point-and-click adventure game, but instead of just taking, okay, this perspective and then this perspective, they'll literally do, like, they'll do camera motions to show you 3D in the world, and then suddenly you're there. And then they'll do this, and then, you know, like, so it's a hybrid between actually taking like a video camera and filming a scene that is made of cardboard, and taking pictures of that scene that's made of cardboard and just playing through those scenes.
There's also Night in the Ghost Lights, that crazy Kickstarter. That
Yeah,
just
that's
came
the
out.
other one. Did they get theirs?
Didn't they? I don't remember.
I don't remember
I'm pretty
either.
sure they took money from me. So.
You saw committee
Found a way
bank,
to
yeah.
hack Kickstarter in a way that,
Yeah. But for all of those games where like the visuals are really interesting, down to like the core mechanics of them, are they really special? And so like what is really, you know, what is really making that game fantastic? Is it the art? Is it the mechanics? Is it the combination of the two? Is it really actually a special game without the way that the art has been presented? I don't know. I feel like that there's a really strong relation. There needs to be a strong relationship between the design of the game and the art of the game. I think that, in my opinion, you can't just have a beautiful game with no design, and you can't just have like, I mean, I guess you can, but I think the really successful ones is where that like marriage happens really well.
If we use film as a comparison, everything supports the story, right? The design, the lighting, the costumes, everything, the acting, the casting, everything's there to support and reinforce and enhance that story. And for games, I think everything's there to support and enhance the game. Anything that adds to the game, that ups the ante, but also reinforces that vision of what kind of game you're trying to create, that experience, basically, that you want your player to have. You have to think of your audience, you have to think what kind of experience you want them to have when they come out of this. You want them to be awed, you want them to be thrilled, you want them to be freaked out, you know, that everything you do supports that.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's how you have to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it comes right back to your point originally about the differences in the two Zelda games, where one of them you feel this kind of creepy feeling, and then one of them you just feel very relaxed, and this is just a nice, a zen kind of feel when you leave it, right? It's all about what your intention is. If you want to feel really stressed out, or if you want your viewer to feel really stressed out, or if you want them to like experience this nice, relaxing, gentle story, or whatever it is, if you want to just be like shooting at people, that's the. It comes back to what you as a player bring to the game as well, right? And what your preferences are. When do we go into?
Do we
go to 8:30? Oh, 8:30. Wow. I
have a
for
question,
1 hour.
completely off topic, but
Yeah,
it's
that's
about
okay.
developers and artists. I came here because I have this question. I mean, it's basically, I'm a developer, but I was always artistic as a kid. I lost it somewhere in the midst of, I don't know, whatever. But the thing is, if I want to be a developer, I apply to university, and they're like, yeah, okay, you can come in and be, or college or whatever, and you get approved based on basic educational requirements, and then you can go and learn. If I want to go be an artist, I gotta go apply to like Herzing or something. They're like, that's great, we'd love to have you, just show us your portfolio. Like, I have to be an artist to become an artist. And I guess like as someone who's interested in crossing over, I have an idea for a game, I want to do it all by myself. I don't want to be relying on anybody else. I find it kind of difficult to work with artists, at least in my experience. At least in communicating ideas back and forth. So I want to learn the skill, and I know that you can't just, if you want to be a pixel artist, you still have to know how to draw. You still have to know about composition, perspective, and light, and color, and all that stuff. But how do you get over to the other side? Because it seems to be easier to be an artist and learn coding than it is to be a coder and learn to draw. So What's the deal?
What's the deal? So I, funny enough, completely like disagree with you because I could not go and learn how to
I
code.
could teach you how to program.
My brain.
Before you could teach me how to draw.
I disagree. Challenge accepted. So I'm assuming that like there's a formula to learning how to code. I don't understand that formula. There is a formula to learning how to draw, and that formula has to do with understanding how to see things, knowing what form is and how colors work, and kind of from there, it's really just rinse and repeat. And the more that you keep doing it, the better you get. Which I'm assuming is kind of like learning a language or learning how to write or how to be a coder. I don't know.
It should be that way. I mean, I've researched countless things. I've got every book on animation and drawing there is. Drawing on the right side of the brain. I know about the picture plane and all that stuff, but it's not taken. I got the Riven Phoenix Structure of Man DVDs. And I can only draw that skeleton figure so many times.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, I guess it depends on what kind of artist you want to be, right? So if it is like pixel art that you're really interested in doing, then like I guess you just have to practice doing pixel art.
I think that might be I tried that. I think that might be the wrong way because pixel art is never going to teach me about foreshortening. It's never going to teach me about how to instinctively know where to put the pixels. Like pixel art is just drawing, but harder because you're constrained. Like I don't. It's like saying like I should learn how to be good at baseball by having a weight on my bat all the time. You know what I mean? Like I don't think the extra handicap makes it more achievable. I don't know. I'm confused by it. Everyone in here is probably and most of you are artists, right? So you probably started when you were 6 or something, drawing in the sketchbooks and whatnot.
No, I actually switched. I switched to this. I have a previous degree, and I actually been in this, not necessarily industry, but I've been studying it for the past 2.5 years, almost 3 years since I'm going to be graduating in April. I was in woodworking. I learned how to make furniture, design, do that way, but then just my passion for just being a gamer, being a nerd, and just knowing all the cool games that were coming. I wanted to be part of that, so that's why I changed. But then I wanted to be. I liked the art part of it because I love the textures. I love the way the characters were made. I always wanted to know how it was done. So that's why I decided to become an artist. I'm not really a pro just yet, since I'm a student, but I don't know. It's just the way that I saw it. Because when I went to MIGS last year, and one of the speakers was telling you you can learn how to draw a figure, you can learn how to sketch and do all that stuff, but then you got to find yourself as to what you define yourself as an artist. Like, what's your profession? What kind of art do you like to do? Because there's one person that's good at realistic art, and there's another person that's a cartoon. But it's the same kind of, you have to have the same knowledge, like how the form is, but then you can exaggerate that form to make it your own. So that's the only thing. I'm still trying to find that, what my personal art style is. I don't really have one yet. I'm trying not to be like someone else, which I find in art, that's probably the difficulty when somebody wants to be an artist. It's like, oh, I want to be like him, but then you actually want to be like yourself. You want to actually be unique. So
I debated about creating a deviant art and just putting the most horrible, I get kicked off deviant art for how bad.
You can't get kicked off deviant art. Yeah, there's some really terrible stuff on there.
Yeah. But I'm just thinking.
So I mean, so if you think about Picasso. Picasso started off not doing all that cube stuff, right? He was a figure painter, and he learned how to create beautiful photorealistic paintings. You have to understand how does color work. If something is further away from you, it lightens in certain kinds of light, and if it's if it's dark out, it's going to get darker because it's further away. But if it's daytime, it'll get lighter as it's further away. Things like how do hot colors and cool colors work together in order to create contrast and allow you to have a visual focal point. And those are all sort of things that you you have to have this sort of innate knowledge of, and you have to practice it, and they're like the, you know, the basics of design and art is these sort of principles of what makes something aesthetically pleasing, what makes something work as a form, what draws your eye through the image. And those are all things that you need to learn, I think, before you can go and do anything like Cubism, for example. You know, all of those things that Picasso started with was, you know, this idea of form and structure and how does light work and how do colors work and where do we see these colors from, and then taking that and totally skewing it, but that information is all still there, right? It's just been pixelized, right? Yeah. So maybe that's something that you have to have that step there first before you can, you know, move into the realm of pixels. Like, I agree with you. I think it would probably be harder to like sit down and be like, okay, I'm gonna try to be Picasso and like do all this Cubism stuff, right?
You're learning by rote at that point.
Yeah.
It's like aping patterns that you don't actually understand. It's like stealing apples instead of planting trees, right? You have to know how to reproduce them.
So the other question is like, how much time do you have to put into it?
0.
Yeah. So, and that's the hard part, right? I mean, I guess I could say I'm gonna sit down and learn, you know, German or something like that.
I could do an hour a day probably, and that would be like stealing that time from various other commitments. But I would be willing to sleep an hour less a day if it meant I could learn this skill.
Do you bus a lot?
Yeah.
Just buy a little sketch pad and do character sketches as you go. It'll help with your form as well. You'll get a lot quicker at it, and it'll give you a lot better practice than doing the same thing over and over.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
Yeah, drawing different things. So drawing like, you know, a bottle versus drawing a chair versus drawing a person versus drawing a flower. They all have different kinds of forms, and something that might help with like learning how to draw those things is understanding that like everything is made up of certain sorts of shapes, right? So like, you know, a bottle is mostly cylinders, and if you look at like a flower is kind of this cylinder that has been broken up, right? And thinking about things in that terms of depth like that.
I think I can do that from an intellectual point of view. I understand exactly what you're saying. In making games, you understand how everything is broken into polygons and all that, but like it's a different thing to have it in your muscles and in your hands and your head to be able to just have that capability on tap. Anyway, I didn't mean to derail the conversation, but very curious about that.
It's an interesting question. It's hard to answer though. I don't know. Like for me, I've been drawing since I was like 6. Yeah,
I've been programming since I was 6.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like I got all this far down the path, and I'm like, oh, I want to do the other thing. It's too late for me.
It's not too late. I know a lot of people who kind of pick it up later on in life, and a lot of them are actually very successful because they come at it from a very uneducated point of view, which is really interesting. If anybody's played the game Cranium, the board game Cranium, the artist who did all of that work, his name's Gary Baseman, and he was in finance or something like that for a really long time, and then all of a sudden just decided, I don't want to do this anymore, I want to be an artist, and he like couldn't draw, couldn't do a single thing, and he didn't go to school, he didn't do anything, he just like started doodling and drawing, and like he turned into this giant illustrating god for like 10 years. He was just, everyone was like, oh my goodness, his work is so unique and interesting and beautiful and all this stuff, right? And sometimes it's more just about, you know, I don't need to ape everybody else around me. I can just, maybe it's more legitimate to make a game out of Stickman or something. Or maybe like the way that you draw is, maybe you need to allow yourself, your programming self to be okay with what you're creating, and maybe creating a game based off of like what your abilities are right now might be the most interesting thing. Maybe it might be horrible. But sometimes there's that leap of faith that needs to happen as well. I find more so with art than, like, I mean, having a technical ability and being able to program, like that's a logical thing, right? Like, you know, either it works or it doesn't work. But with art, because it's so subjective, you know, there's never really like a right and wrong. at the end of the day.
I disagree. In programming, you can arrive at the correct answer a million different ways. So there is art in programming. There's
Oh, yeah,
it's a very
absolutely. I
subjective,
believe that.
natural way. Yeah, I mean, you have to be creative to be a programmer. I don't think you can just play by numbers. I mean, there are a lot of people that do that. You know, the Donald Knuth, you know, whatever. But they don't necessarily make good game programmers. I think they make really good like network, like TCP/IP protocol type stuff. But I don't think they can make games. Maybe not.
I mean, I don't understand programming, but I definitely agree with you that like it takes a certain kind of person to make a good game, like to make it work and to deal with like deal with people like me. It's like, well, why don't you just like throw this in there? And they're like, but the entire engine is built to not do that. So now I need to like try to work around all of that and make it happen. That's kind of been like this story for WinForge is like, we're making a 2D game, but we want it to be 3D. And the whole thing has just been fighting this 2D platform to make it look 3D, and it's just been a fight like the whole way. It's been really interesting. You come up with a lot of really creative ways to get around it, but at the end of the day, I was just like, we should have just made it 3D. We should have just made a 3D game. So it's, yeah, I don't know where that point went, but are there any other artists in the room that have any good tips and pointers?
Well, when I was working on a gunner for our school project over the Christmas break, I had like the perfect idea on how I wanted to model him. Like I know exactly how I want like the face to look, like the helmet and like the shoulder pad and all that stuff. I know what he should look like, and I go to try to model it, and I kept failing and failing and failing and failing. I'm like, well, what's going on? I'm like, hey, maybe I'll just like quickly draw something real quick on a piece of paper. You know, maybe I can come up with what I'm thinking on the paper and then put it on the computer, and it'll look 3D. So I tried that, and it was kind of crap drawing, but I just kept going at it and going at it and going at it and expressing my thought onto the paper so I can express the paper's thought onto the screen. It eventually, like working at it, it took me like 3 days till I finally had exactly what I wanted before I started fully modeling it. But yeah, like just polishing, and even if it looks like crap, eventually you can make it look better by polishing more on the computer or on Photoshop or MS Paint or whatever.
Yeah. Well, so I teach at Algonquin College, and I teach in the Integrated Multimedia Developer Program, and I teach design. And in that program, they learn kind of everything from you know, programming, like website stuff, and film and sound editing, and like all kinds of different things. And I teach the little section of design. And one thing that I always push is, you know, we have a sketchbook. Even though I'm teaching Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, all those programs, we need to have a sketchbook. And I don't care if you don't know how to draw, but having a sketchbook to start, to get your idea down on paper, because it's really intimidating to sit down with an idea in your brain and sit down at an empty screen and be like, okay, I got to put what's in here on this box, and this box will not be able to tell you how to structure that. Your hand on a piece of paper with a bunch of stick lines is going to allow your brain to understand how to translate that amorphous thing in your head into this sort of 2D world that maybe will become into a 3D world or whatever. But I totally and 100% agree with, like, that is, if you are getting stuck, like, get the old, I have so much paper at my desk. I have a tablet, and I can draw on the tablet, that's fine, but for me, nothing beats this.
Plastic paper.
Yeah, yeah, because it's a great place to do problem solving. If I'm trying to come up with an idea or generate ideas, doing that in your head, you get into a cycle. You get this, like, that's my first idea and my second idea, and then you just get stuck. those two things because they're not going anywhere. And you're like, I'm just going to do that one idea because it's the only thing I can think about, and it ends up being crap because it was the first idea was the most obvious, and that's the one that that's everybody's first answer, right? And that's why it was your first answer. But if you can get it down on paper, it immediately frees it out of your brain, and you can come up with more stuff and generate and generate and generate, and then you start seeing patterns, and you start saying, oh, this is good and this is good, and maybe I can take those two things and put them together and like make this new thing that's going to be awesome. The problem is that it takes time, and that nobody wants to put the time in to do that because they want to just be able to sit at the computer and make it happen, right? And that's the training part. That's where the learning happens, is like just on a piece of paper and not being like, I need to create a beautiful piece of art. It's not what it's about. It's about doing the problem solving.
That problem solving that you just described is 100% generic.
Oh yeah,
It's exactly
absolutely.
what programmers do.
Yeah.
It's exactly what anybody does with any
If
type of
anybody's good at what they do, that's what they do.
Yeah.
You know? People who are like, oh, I can't come up with a good idea, you know, how come everything that I do is so generic, blah, blah, blah. That's because they don't take the time to do that step, right? And because that step is actually really difficult if you're not used to doing it. Because it's very like, there's a blank piece of paper and there's one idea, and like, where do I go from there? It's really scary, right?
It's like how you speak art before you put it on there, you know, put it on the screen. It's like pseudocode, I guess, if you're going to go write code down before you go and actually type it up on the computer and like figure out like how everything's going to work before you put it on, so it's not spaghetti code. It's kind of like that, you know, but with drawings, and whether or not it looks good or like crap, it's going to end up looking better than it was looking on the paper once it's on the computer, especially after you put some time into polishing it. You know, it can happen. Same thing with code. You know, like you have a bunch of public variables, and there's like spaghetti code everywhere, and then you're like, oh, I got to clean this up and make constants everywhere or whatever, make a whole CS folder for constants or whatever. It's very, very similar, I guess, except one you're doing math, and the other one you're coloring.
Which is kind of like math, because there is a formula to it, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's not just throwing colors down on a thing because you think it looks nice. Like, there is a math to it. There's a formula, there's rules. Yeah, so you have to learn the rules and then break all the rules. But you have to, you know how to break them properly, I guess. Just like with coding, I'm imagining.
Yeah.
Know the rules and then break them all and do something totally different.
Actually, similar to that point, something that I noticed I did a lot both when I was drawing and when I was learning code is what I would do is I would take some sort of base model. So for drawing I'd have like this really basic human shape, and for coding I'd get like a really basic program. Take them, just reproduce that exactly or as closely as I can, and then just kind of work off of that first. Then as you're building on top of that, you get an idea for the form, even if you haven't learnt it. It hasn't really been taught to you, but by aping it, you start to learn the basic conventions, after which it becomes easier to understand how that works or why that works the way it does. At which point then it becomes easier to start fiddling with those original bases and doing something a little more creative. So that's the method I used for a lot of my stuff, and I found that worked pretty well. And also on the topic of adapting from paper, I do a lot of pixel illustration, and I did that mostly, initially I couldn't do anything like on the computer itself. In order to learn it, all I do is I just draw it by hand first, scan it, and then just draw over that scan.
Mm-hmm.
So working off of a base sometimes is a lot easier, especially when you're still learning. It gives you the chance to figure out how to do it and at least get that muscle memory, at which point it becomes easier to do it more freehand.
Yeah, good points all around. Trying to see if I have any more questions. Yeah.
So in terms of there's kind of obvious challenges that I see as a developer. I mean, I'm interested in doing my own art stuff as well, but that an artist making art and creating a design, visual design for a game, there's the obvious challenges, all the technical stuff, and that's the stuff that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. Before you start getting into, I guess, the implementation, what are the common major design problems, or like the really challenging design problems that come up with making a visual presentation for a game? And I don't know what I'm asking for. And that's exactly why I'm asking this question, because
Okay.
I don't know exactly what I'm asking for. What are the really deep things that there's no way I could know about?
As a developer?
As a designer, as an artist,
As an
creating an art and a visual presentation for a game, what are the really like advanced, challenging things that you struggle with?
How to make it work. That's that's to me the most challenging thing. And again, that's why I think it's really important to have a good relationship between like the person who's going to be taking your work and doing something with it, and like how you're creating, because it's a very synchronous kind of relationship, right? Like I might have an idea and be like, okay, I want it to do this, and it's going to move this way, and it's going to be able to do this and this and this, and they'll be like, nope. We can do this though, and like, awesome. Like you often have to have that sort of first representation. That's what I've found anyways, is like, that's where it's sort of the concept art. Everybody thinks, when you say concept art, everybody always thinks like, oh, these beautiful matte painting, blah, blah, blah things. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about. Especially, you know, with a game like Windforged, it is very like 2D, 5 minutes? Awesome. It's a very 2D, and it has a certain kind of style, right? It's a little bit more cartoony-ish. It has an aesthetic, and you have to kind of work within that aesthetic. So when I do concept art, you do the concept art with that in mind, right? With those sort of restrictions. But once you've done the concept art, you bring it to somebody who will make it work and be like, this is how I envision it working. And then, you know, I'll put a couple of really sort of loose animations to it and just put it in Photoshop or whatever, move it around or whatever, and be like, this is how it's going to work. And then, you know, it'll be either, yeah, that's awesome, how about we do this, or no, we can't do that, but this is what we can do. And then I'll be like, great, now I know my limitations, now I know what I have to work with. Once I understand what that box is, then I get to fill that box however I can. And that's the really exciting part to me, is like, anybody can just go ahead and do whatever they want. Right? But the reason why I love being part of gaming and just design in general, and I'm not just some artist that like goes out and does whatever they want, and you know, I'm gonna make paintings and please somebody buy it. I like to work for something, like work for a client, create a, you know, something for somebody with a limitation, and that's where I think I thrive on, and knowing where that box is and what we can and can't do. And then how can we push as much out of that box as we can to do, like, to get it done and not to worry about what we can't do. So let's focus on like solving the problem and doing like the best thing with that we can. Does that sort of answer your question?
Sure.
That to me is the most difficult but also most enjoyable and fulfilling part. Because again, anybody can do a painting and make it beautiful and do beautiful concept art and all that stuff. Well, maybe not anybody, but it's easier to do that stuff than to do game art, to be like a more constricted game artist. And not everybody is good at that and working within those restrictions, but I find that really exciting. That's a very good question. Anybody else have any other additional points? Anybody that's like artist / developer that's found an interesting little niche there?
Yes.
Yeah? What's that? What is that like? I'm just curious.
It's very odd.
I imagine it would be.
Yeah, it's one of those sorts of things where even though you're kind of in a position to do all three, it's always more comfortable to do one or the other. The big challenge with it is finding a way to organize your thoughts to keep everything in line, because it's really easy if you have both of those mentalities to just kind of go off on one and then realize that you've completely lost track on the other side. So the big challenge with it is trying to think about both the art and the development without excluding the consideration of the other.
Yeah, because I guess if you have, you know, two different people that kind of represent those two sides, it's a lot easier to try to make that balance happen. But if it's just one person, it's a little bit more of a difficult balance, right? Because you don't have that same pushback, right? You know, somebody being like, well, no, you're not listening to me. You're not like including these ideas that I have, or no, like you're not listening to me. I can't do these things that you're telling me, or you know, that kind of thing. Like there's no pushback as much, because you're like, well, I could do that. And how can I make that work on this side? Like, well, if I could do that, then could I do this over here on this side, right? To me, that would be paralyzing.
And at that point,
write down everything.
Yeah. It's like you're in a corner rock.
Yeah, pretty much. That's my Saturday nights. But yeah, at that point, it's almost better to just have one person in charge of choosing between those two, and then one for each. And I think that's really how most game companies have their setup, is they have the artist block, the developer block, and then they have the designers who are in part responsible for their own little section of all building systems, but then also of informing both of the others and balancing them. So that's why I chose to go into design rather than to strictly art or strictly programming, because if you can think both those ways, then it gives you an edge. But at the same time, it doesn't force you to try and think about both at the same time, because that would just become overwhelming, to me at least.
Are there any of the artists here that are planning to get into design, just out of curiosity, like game design?
So, I'm an artist with a lot of ideas.
Which is always good.
I like a bit of level design, levels in a sense.
Yeah. Well, it's like it's a creative outlet in its own way. You know, you get to extend your creative ability to just not just to like creating assets, but like how are those assets being used.
So I would suggest to continue this discussion at the artist round for everyone that is interested. I'll be there. And I don't know if you want to do your conclusion remarks, or if
I think we've kind of been having conclusion remarks for the past little bit, so I think we're good. If we want to conclude at the Heart and Crown, we can.
Thank you, Kara, for monitoring this roundtable.
Thank you.
It wasn't Outlast, it was Outland.
Outland.
Yeah, for the game. Outlast is that horror game that's gonna.
Yeah.
Be
Oh yeah, that's awesome.
I don't think that's the game you're talking about.
It took me a minute. I'm just like, no. So I googled it. I'm like, yeah.
It's only 2 letters off, to be fair.
Yeah.